The sun dipped low behind the row of suburban homes, painting long shadows across the cul-de-sac. Neighbors stood in hushed disbelief, watching as Karen swung her shiny luxury car into Marcus's garage as if it were her own. She stepped out with a triumphant smirk, smoothing her cardigan like a queen claiming her throne. "Ah! This space isn't being used," she said loudly enough for every ear nearby. HOA rules say unused areas belong to the community. And since Marcus barely does anything with his garage, I'll be parking here for now. "Ah!" Her voice dripped with arrogance, her gaze daring anyone to challenge her. No one did. Fear of her sharp tongue and her influence in the HOA kept their heads low. They had seen her punish those who spoke up before. Fines appearing out of nowhere, threats hidden in polite language. "Ah!" But this was no ordinary garage. Behind its worn steel door was Marcus's sanctuary. It wasn't just a place to store tools, it was a workshop. A safe haven, a space heavy with memories. His father had spent countless evenings there, teaching him how to sand wood, fix engines, and take pride in creating something with his own hands. Every oil stain, every dent in the workbench carried the weight of history. "Ah!" And now Karen's arrogance invaded it like an unwanted storm. "Ah!" Neighbors whispered nervously as she strutted away from the car, satisfied with her conquest. To her, Marcus's silence meant submission. To her, his calm nature was weakness. "Ah!" But she hadn't yet met the silence that fights back. She hadn't yet seen what patience can do when pushed too far. "Ah!" At that very moment, Marcus returned home. He walked down the street with his steady stride, his expression unreadable. The neighbors' eyes flicked from him to the garage, waiting to see if he would shout, argue, or crumble under Karen's rule. "Ah!" But Marcus only looked at the car inside his garage, then at the door. His hand brushed the keys in his pocket, and a quiet strength rose in his chest. "Ah!" Karen had walked into his space without permission. She was about to learn what it meant to be locked inside her own arrogance. Marcus was not the kind of man who sought confrontation. He valued quiet mornings on his porch, afternoons repairing small engines, evenings reading by a soft lamp. His strength came not from loud words, but from the weight of self-control. The garage was more than shelter for tools. It was the place where his late father had built a life of lessons. Together, they had fixed old lawnmowers, sanded down wooden chairs, and tuned up beat-up cars that sputtered back to life under their hands. The air had always been filled with the smell of oil and sawdust, the sound of laughter over stubborn bolts and rusted screws. When his father passed, the garage became Marcus's way of keeping him close. So when Karen declared the space community property, it wasn't just an insult. It was erasure. She had not only taken his space, but mocked the legacy written into its walls. The neighbors knew Marcus paid his dues on time. They knew his garage belonged only to him, but fear of Karen's wrath made them quiet. Her power didn't come from rules, it came from intimidation. She had fined people for leaving trash cans out too long, written angry letters over children's bicycles on driveways, even threatened lawsuits over holiday decorations she didn't approve of. Now she believed Marcus would bow like everyone else. But Marcus didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he reached for the heavy steel garage door and pulled it down. The slam echoed across the street like a verdict. He turned the lock, slid the bolt in place, and pocketed the keys. Karen's car was now trapped. The neighbors gasped softly, some covering their smiles, others turning away so she wouldn't see their relief. For once, someone had answered her arrogance, not with shouting, not with pleading, but with quiet resolve. When Karen returned later and found the garage locked, her voice carried through the cul-de-sac in shrill outrage. She pounded on the door, demanding Marcus open it. But he remained calm, sitting on his porch with a glass of water, his silence stronger than her noise. For the first time, Karen's power began to crack. The HOA called an emergency meeting the very next day. Word had spread quickly, and nearly every seat in the small clubhouse was filled. Whispers buzzed in the air as neighbors waited for the fireworks they knew were coming. Karen stormed in, her heels striking the tile floor like a drumbeat of fury. Her face was flushed red, eyes blazing with indignation. In one hand, she clutched a stack of papers, shaking them for all to see as though they were proof of some great injustice. "This is outrageous," she shouted before she'd even sat down. "That man has no right to hold my car hostage. This is a violation of community rights. I demand the board take immediate action." Her voice rose higher and sharper with every word. She waved her papers like weapons, insisting she had been wronged, painting herself as the helpless victim of a cruel attack. Some neighbors looked away, uncomfortable with her theatrics, but others leaned forward, curious to see what Marcus would do. At the far end of the table, Marcus sat quietly. He hadn't spoken a word since the meeting began. His hands rested calmly in front of him, his posture steady, his expression unreadable. He didn't flinch at Karen's accusations, nor did he interrupt her tirade. He simply waited, his silence more commanding than her noise. Finally, the board turned toward him. All eyes followed. Marcus rose slowly to his feet, moving with quiet certainty. He placed a thick folder on the table and opened it with deliberate care. Inside were documents, his deed, his property records, receipts from the garage's construction and maintenance. Every page was official, stamped, notarized, undeniable. One by one, the board members leaned forward to read. The room grew still. Karen's voice faltered, her bluster collapsing as the truth stared back at her in black and white. Marcus spoke at last, his voice low but steady, every syllable carrying weight. "Silence is not weakness," he said. "Respect isn't optional. And some doors only open with integrity." His words cut through the air like a bell. No anger, no shouting, just clarity. They lingered long after he sat back down, echoing in the minds of everyone present. Karen's face drained of color. For the first time, she looked smaller, her authority slipping away. Around the room, neighbors who had always stayed quiet began to nod. Some even straightened in their chairs, as though Marcus's calm had breathed courage into them. The board exchanged glances. There was no debate, no excuse left to give. The documents were undeniable. The ruling came swiftly. Marcus was fully within his rights. The garage was his, and the car would remain locked inside until Karen resolved the matter directly with him. For Karen, the verdict struck harder than any punishment. In that moment, she realized the control she had wielded so carelessly was gone. And for the first time, the neighborhood saw who truly held the strength. Karen stood in Marcus's driveway the following day, no longer smug, no longer triumphant. Her voice was smaller now, hesitant, weighed down by the consequences of her arrogance. She handed Marcus a written apology, agreeing to pay damages for trespassing and misuse of property. Only then did Marcus unlock the garage. The heavy steel door rolled upward with a groan, revealing her polished car inside. She climbed in quickly, her eyes avoiding his. The neighbors stood at their windows and porches, watching silently as the woman who once ruled through fear drove away with none of her old fire. The balance of power had shifted and it wasn't coming back. Marcus walked into his garage and stood among the tools. The workbench, the faint smell of oil. He ran his hand across the wood his father had once touched. And he felt the weight of something deeper than victory. He felt the strength of keeping dignity intact. The garage was his again. More than that, the street was free again. He looked out at the neighbors gathering, their faces brighter, their shoulders lighter. Respect had returned, not through force, but through quiet strength. "Sometimes," Marcus whispered, "the loudest answer is silence." And with that, he closed the garage door behind him, not as a shield, but as a reminder. Respect had been restored.